So in this lesson, we're going to be making a request to the Wikipedia API and then returning the data back onto the page. So we've got two parameters here. So we've got an input and a button. So within here, you can enter in a search term and then load the JSON data. And this JSON data is coming from the Wikipedia page. So it's coming from this Wikipedia page. We've got some basic search information as well as the results array. Then we loop through the array and output the results onto the page. So that includes the title, some of the information on the page, and then the snippet from the page itself. And this is all within the JSON data that's returned. And then you can also click these, and these are going to open up within Wikipedia to the corresponding page. And whatever term you put in there, it's going to give you results, the total number of results, and the first 10 entries formatted within the same way, where you can click over to the page. And the objective is to go through the Wikipedia API and get some of that JSON data back and output it onto the page. So make use of the data that's on the page. And there's quite a bit that you can do with this API. There's a lot of information here, so you can really get some good practice in working with JSON and AJAX requests. Let's go ahead and connect to the Wikipedia API. There's more information available about the Wikipedia API over at the Wikipedia API. So I'll give you some examples, documentation examples of how to make a connection. So we're going to be just doing a simple query. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of parameters that you can enter in to make your request to this API. So this is a fairly rich API. There's a lot of data on Wikipedia, and it's a great place to testing out the API requests and getting some content back onto the page. So let's go ahead and select this endpoint. And I've updated the index.html to connect to app2.js, kept some of the content from the last one, and we don't need that. And I'll just update the web URL to the Wikipedia. And then what we'll do is within the GET request, we can add in these as parameters into the GET request. So it does have a search term. So first off, we're just going to make the initial connection to the URL and then output that into the console. And from there, we'll go and we'll continue to build out the endpoint and output the data. So let's add an event listener. So the event listener that we're listening for on the button is going to be click, and then returning back the event object. And this is where we're going to make our fetch request. So this fetch request is going to the web URL. And then once the request is made, we return back the response content as a JSON object. So take it back as JSON using the JSON method. And then the next promise is where we actually get the JSON as data. And from there, we can console log and output the data content onto the page. So let's try it. And we do need to make sure that we've got the return. So we do have a successful connection to the Wikipedia endpoint, and we've got some search results. So this is the array that we want to output on the page, and it's got some titles, word count, timestamps. So it's got some basic information, page ID, and so on, as well as a snippet returning back some content. So what we want to do is we want to loop through the query and the search, and if it does have a length, then return back the content. We can also output some of these other values that we have here. There's also the offset. So if we want to continue and load additional pages, we could do that as well. So let's create a function, and we can just call that maker. And what this is going to do is this is going to loop through, iterate the data that's being returned. And so we're just going to focus in this lesson, we're just going to focus on the query data. So we'll send over the data as from the query object. And then from here, we can loop through the data and get the search results. And then this should have a length associated with it. So now that we've got just the search object, And let's, instead of console logging it out, we'll load it to the function. So that just returns back the array of results. So that makes it fairly easy to loop through the data search results. And we can even simplify this as well and do a data query search. And that way we're just getting the array with a length. And that's going to make it easy for the next part where we're doing a for each and looping through, returning back each one of the elements and then outputting them onto the page. So let's console log the element object. Again, making the connection and using the console in order to see the content that we want to output. So what we want to do is on the output page, we want to output the results. So take output and update the inner HTML. And for whatever the search term is, we'll add that in afterwards. So let's return back and we'll construct the page content for this. So we'll have a main div container using the document create element, create the element as a div. And then within the div, we're going to append the additional pieces of content. So we have an option here where if we want to, we could populate the div with this content, or we could add additional elements. So in this case, just to keep things simple, let's update the HTML. So we'll add to the HTML using the template literals, the backticks. And for now, we'll just output the title. And then lastly, let's take output and append output with the newly created element. So this should load all of the titles onto the page. So there's the titles. So search for, and it's returning back the content. Each one of these also has a snippet. So this is HTML. So potentially we could output this as HTML. So we just add to it, and we'll add the results of the elements. And this is just referred to as snippet. And we'll see what that looks like on the page. So now it's adding in the results for the snippet. Let's also apply some styling. And we'll just give it a class of box, padding, and set the margin to auto so we can center the content. I'll set the width of the content to be 80% so we can center it. Also, let's do a border. So around it, one pick solid border. And let's also do a border radius. So slightly rounded borders. I'll see what this looks like. And of course, we can always adjust this as needed. And of course, we need to add the style. So take the div using class list, add the class of box to it. So that will apply styling to the results. So it's easier to read the results. You can also apply some styling to the title. So to close those off. And also, if you wanted to, you could add in the page ID and the word count as well. So let's add those values in. So these can just be spans, or actually we'll set them up as divs directly within the box. And then we can apply some additional styling to box and divs that are immediately within it. Padding is going to be 10 pixels, and let's update the font size to 1.2 EM. So within the divs, right now we're just loading the title again, but what we want to load is we want to load some of these numbers. So let's load in the page ID, and just have some dashes or the pipes to separate these. And we'll use the same format. So we've got a size. So a number of values here that we can use and output. And let's do one last one, and we'll do the word count. And that's under the object word count. So what I'm doing is I'm just looking at what we've got here within the console and the breakdown of the object and picking out the pieces of the object that I want to use. And because we have the page ID, we can also link to the page itself. So let's add in another option, or we can just link within the title tag. So doing an href, and the endpoint of the link is going to be whatever the title is or whatever the ID is. So we can grab the ID object value here and set the target as blank so it opens up to a new page. And then close that off, and then this is where we can use the title. So load that. So now when I click it, it's going to actually open up the corresponding pages on Wikipedia to our search. And this is how you can practice and connect to the Wikipedia endpoint and output the content on the page accordingly. I'm also going to just do some quick checks here and update some of the content. So also let's update the request so we can actually search for whatever field we've got there. So we're going to update the request URL to search for a particular term. And the rest of this is going to be okay. The only one that we need to change is going to be this last part here where we've got the search term. So let's go ahead and we can remove it out from the endpoint, or we could really simplify it and just pull that information out of the web URL. And let's create temp URL. And the temp URL is going to be URL plus whatever we've got for the search term. So let's get a search term. And the search term can come from the input value here, or it can just be a default, and the default can be JavaScript, so that we always have some type of value for the search term. And so let's update the temp URL with the search term. We can console log the temp URL out into the console, and then let's also update the URL that we're making the request to be the search return. So now we should get, or should be able to pull back different results depending on what we've got within the search term. And also we should select and pass the search term. And let's actually see if we can get the search term dynamically from the data object. And that way we can pass the data object. So we've got the query and the number of hits for that particular term. So what we can do is we can update that output information over here with the data before we send it over to Maker. So results for, and we're going to have the search term here. And then let's update the inner HTML. And I'm using the backticks here. So under the query, so within the data object query and search info and total hits, I should see a value for the total hits, total results, and then just do a line break there. And I'll wrap this within a div. So results for hello, total results that we have. And there we've got the results for JavaScript. Let's try JSON. And the results that we have for JSON. Challenge for this lesson is to make an AJAX request to search results on Wikipedia. Also make a dynamic input field that can search for the results on Wikipedia, depending on what the value is within the field. Create a button that's going to make the page interactive and output the return back JSON results onto your web page. And then also go further and try out all the different endpoints and different parameters within your Wikipedia request.